You know thousands of English words. So why do you freeze the moment you try to use them in a real conversation?
Hello and welcome. We are so proud to have you here. I'm Sophie.
And I'm David. Really wonderful to have you here with us today.
Before we dive into what I genuinely believe is one of the most important conversations we've had on this podcast, a quick, warm request from us. If you're finding these episodes useful, please subscribe to the channel right now. It's completely free, and it means you'll never miss a lesson.
Please like this video as well. It helps us reach more learners around the world who need exactly this conversation. And we have a question for you today, a really important one, and we want you to answer it in the comments below. We'll tell you what it is in just a moment.
And if you have a friend, a classmate, or anyone you know who is learning English and struggling with vocabulary, please share this episode with them. It could genuinely change the way they learn. Right, let's get into it.
So, today's question. And this is the one we want you to answer in the comments. Here it is.
Think of a word you memorized recently for your English studies. Maybe you wrote it on a flashcard or added it to a vocabulary list. Now ask yourself honestly, have you ever used that word in a real conversation?
Write your answer below, yes or no. And if the answer is no, this episode is going to explain exactly why. And more importantly, what to do about it.
Let's start with a scenario that I think every single learner will recognize. You sit down to study English. You open your vocabulary list or your flashcard app, and you go through 20, 30, maybe 50 words. You test yourself. You get most of them right. You feel productive. You feel like you've learned something.
And then 2 days later, someone asks you a question in English. Maybe at work, maybe in a shop, maybe in a social situation. And you open your mouth and the words are simply not there.
Or worse, you know the word exists somewhere in your memory, but you can't access it quickly enough. So you hesitate, you fumble, you use a simpler word instead, and the moment passes.
And you go home feeling frustrated, thinking, I studied that word. I knew that word. Why couldn't I use it?
This experience is so common that most learners assume the problem is them. They think, I have a bad memory. I need to study more. I need a better app. I need to repeat the word more times.
But that's not the problem at all. The problem is the method. Because memorizing a word and learning a word are two completely different things. And most traditional vocabulary study is memorization, not learning.
And the difference between those two things is enormous. It is the difference between knowing a word exists and being able to use it, fluently, confidently, and automatically in the middle of a conversation.
Let me explain the distinction clearly. When you memorize a word, when you learn that benevolent means kind and generous, your brain stores that as an isolated fact, a piece of information, like a phone number you've memorized but never dialed.
The information is there, but it's not connected to anything. It has no context, no emotion, no experience attached to it. It sits in your memory like a book on a shelf, available if you go looking for it deliberately, but not accessible in the fast, fluid, automatic way that real conversation requires.
Because in real conversation, you don't have time to go looking. You need words to arrive instantly, without conscious effort. The way your native language words arrive. You don't think, what is the word for this feeling? It's just there.
And that automaticity, that instant, effortless access to words, only develops through a completely different kind of engagement with vocabulary than simple memorization.
So the question is, what does that different kind of engagement actually look like? How do you move from memorizing words to genuinely learning them?
That's exactly what the rest of today's episode is going to answer.
Before we get to the solutions, I want to spend a moment on why memorization fails so consistently. Because I think understanding the mechanism makes the alternatives much more compelling.
The human brain does not store information equally. Some things stick instantly and permanently. A powerful emotional experience, a piece of music you heard at an important moment. the smell of something that reminds you of childhood. Others require enormous conscious effort and fade quickly. Isolated facts, random lists, decontextualized information.
And there's a reason for that difference. The brain is constantly making decisions about what to keep and what to discard. And the primary criterion is this relevant? Is this connected to something I already know? Is this emotionally significant? Is this something I'm likely to encounter again?
A vocabulary list of 50 unrelated words fails almost all of those criteria. The words aren't connected to each other or to anything you already know. They have no emotional significance. They arrived without context, and the brain treats them accordingly, as low-priority information that can be safely forgotten.
There's actually a well-established principle in cognitive psychology called the levels of processing theory. It suggests that information is remembered better when it's processed more deeply, when you think about its meaning, its associations, its use, rather than simply repeating it.
So repeating a word 20 times on a flashcard is shallow processing. You're engaging with the surface, the sound, the spelling, but not the meaning, the context, or the feel of the word.
Whereas reading the word in a powerful sentence, hearing it used by a native speaker in an emotional moment, using it yourself in a sentence about your own life, all of that is deep processing. And deeply processed information stays.
There's also the problem of passive knowledge versus active knowledge. Most vocabulary memorization builds passive knowledge. You can recognize the word when you see it. But active knowledge, being able to produce the word spontaneously in speech, requires a completely different kind of practice.
It's the difference between recognizing a face and being able to draw it from memory. Recognition is relatively easy. Production is hard. And most vocabulary study trains recognition while neglecting production entirely.
Right. Solutions. Because I want this episode to be genuinely practical, something you can start applying today. Let's go through the most effective approaches one by one.
The first and most important shift: always learn words in context. Never learn a word in isolation. Whenever you encounter a new word, don't just note the translation or the dictionary definition. Note the sentence it appeared in, the paragraph, the situation, the emotion of the moment.
Because context does several things simultaneously. It shows you how the word is actually used, what kinds of sentences it appears in, what other words it naturally sits beside. It gives the word an emotional and situational anchor in your memory. And it shows you the word's character. Is it formal or informal? Warm or cold? Common or rare?
The word melancholy, for example. You could memorize melancholy equals sadness, but that tells you almost nothing about how to use it. Whereas reading it in a sentence, there was a deep melancholy in his voice as he spoke about the years he'd lost. Tells you it's a slightly literary word, that it suggests a quiet, reflective kind of sadness rather than an acute one, and that it often describes atmosphere or tone rather than simple emotion.
All of that from one sentence. You cannot get that from a flashcard definition.
The second approach: learn words in families and networks. Words don't exist independently in the language. They exist in webs of relationship, synonyms, antonyms, words that often appear together, words that belong to the same topic.
So when you learn a new word, don't stop there. Ask, what are the synonyms? What are the antonyms? What words does this often appear with? What other words belong to this topic area? Build a web, not a list.
For example, you learn the word anxious. Don't stop there. Notice that anxious is related to anxiety, anxiously, and uneasy. Notice that it often appears with words like feel, become, grow, and deeply. Notice that its synonyms include worried, nervous, and apprehensive, each with slightly different connotations.
Now you haven't learned one word. You've learned a whole cluster of related language that reinforces itself. Each word in the cluster makes the others easier to remember.
The third approach: use new words immediately and personally. This is perhaps the most important thing you can do to move a word from passive knowledge into active knowledge. Use it the same day you encounter it, in your own sentences, about your own life and experiences.
Because the moment you use a word to express something genuinely true about yourself, the moment it becomes connected to your own experience and emotion, it belongs to you in a way it simply doesn't when it's sitting on a vocabulary list.
So you encounter the word apprehensive, meaning slightly anxious about something in the future. Don't just note the definition. Write a sentence or say one out loud. I feel apprehensive about my presentation next week. I was apprehensive about moving to a new city. Your own life, your own feelings, your own situation.
That personal connection is incredibly powerful for retention. Research consistently shows that self-referential processing, connecting new information to yourself, produces dramatically stronger memory than processing information abstractly.
The fourth approach: read widely and extensively in English. Because reading is the single most efficient way to encounter vocabulary in rich, varied, natural context. Every page of a well-written book is a vocabulary lesson. You see words used exactly as native speakers use them, in sentences that demonstrate their meaning through context rather than through definition.
And the beauty of extensive reading is that you encounter the same words repeatedly across different texts and different contexts. Each encounter deepens your understanding of the word. You see new sides of it, new uses, new companions. By the time you've encountered a word 10 or 15 times in genuine reading, it genuinely belongs to you.
And read things you enjoy. The emotional engagement you have with a book or an article dramatically increases how much you absorb from it. A compelling novel will teach you more vocabulary than a textbook, because you're not just processing words, you're experiencing a story. And the words become part of that experience.
The fifth approach: pay attention to collocation. Collocation is one of the most important and most underrated concepts in vocabulary learning. A collocation is simply a pair or group of words that naturally occur together in the language. Words that native speakers instinctively put together.
So native speakers don't just do homework, they do their homework. They don't make a decision slowly. They take their time making a decision. They don't have a strong opinion. They hold a strong opinion or feel strongly about something.
And knowing these collocations, knowing which words naturally sit together, is what makes the difference between English that is technically correct and English that sounds completely natural.
A learner might say, "I made a great effort," which is perfectly understandable. But a native speaker would more naturally say, "I made every effort," or "I went to great lengths." The meaning is similar, but the collocations are different.
So when you learn a new word, always learn it with its most natural partners. What verbs does it typically follow? What adjectives typically precede it? What prepositions does it take? These details are what make vocabulary feel alive in your mouth, rather than awkward and uncertain.
Sixth and finally, output, output, output. Speaking and writing. Because all the reading and noticing in the world will not fully transfer a word into your active vocabulary until you've used it yourself. Repeatedly, in different contexts.
Write regularly in English. Journal entries, emails to language exchange partners, comments on English language content. Speak regularly, with a tutor, a language partner, an AI conversation tool, or simply by narrating your thoughts and experiences out loud in English when you're alone.
And when you use a new word, notice how it feels. Does it come naturally? Does it feel slightly awkward? Does the person you're speaking with respond in a way that suggests you've used it correctly? All of that feedback is data that your brain uses to refine and deepen your knowledge of the word.
Each time you successfully use a word in context, each time it arrives without deliberate searching, it becomes a little more automatic, a little more yours.
Right, let's bring everything together. Because we've covered a lot today, and I want it all to feel clear and actionable.
The difference between memorizing vocabulary and learning vocabulary is the difference between storing information and building a skill. Memorization gives you a list of facts your brain can look up slowly and deliberately. Learning gives you a living, flexible, automatic resource you can draw on in real time.
And the way to learn rather than memorize: always encounter words in context. Learn words in families and networks. Use new words immediately and personally. Read widely in English. Pay close attention to collocation. And practice output, speaking and writing as much as possible.
Today's phrase, and it is wonderfully fitting: to have something at your fingertips. It means to have information or a skill so readily accessible that you can use it instantly, without effort. You might say, after years of practice, she had the vocabulary at her fingertips. Or, I don't have the grammar rules at my fingertips yet, but I'm getting there.
That is exactly what we want for your vocabulary. Not locked away in a list, at your fingertips. Ready whenever you need it.
Before we go, remember our question from the beginning. Think of a word you memorized recently. Have you ever used it in a real conversation? Write your answer in the comments below, yes or no, and tell us the word. We genuinely want to know.
Please subscribe if you haven't already. New episodes every week, completely free. A like on the video helps more learners find us. And please share this episode with anyone you know who is learning English and struggling with vocabulary. This conversation could genuinely shift the way they study.
From both of us, thank you so much for being here. Keep learning, not memorizing.
See you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.